Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong. I'm Hovik Manucharyan. We're continuing our special coverage of the blockade in Artsakh in collaboration with 168 AM, aiming to increase the awareness of the plight of the people in Artsakh. This episode was recorded on January 11, 2023, when the blockade of Artsakh is now 31 days old. As of yesterday, Artsakh has introduced coupons to ration food. Other critical supplies are also hard to find. And to add to the issues faced by Artsakhtsis, there are reports of a damaged high voltage electricity cable whose repairs are being prevented by Azerbaijan, resulting in rolling blackouts all throughout Artsakh. Hello, I'm Hovik Manucharyan, and the blockade of Berdzor, aka Lachin corridor in Artsakh, is now 31 days old. We're doing these interviews in collaboration with 168 Hours in order to improve English language coverage of this critical issue. And today we have two guests. First, from rainy Southern California, we have William Bairamian, founder and editor of the Armenite. He has written extensively on Armenian politics, culture, and society, and he has received degrees from Columbia University and UCLA in international relations. And from Armenia, we have Arthur Khachikyan, who is an international relations expert from Stanford University, specializing in intervention. He currently teaches at the Russian Armenian University in Yerevan. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Hovik.
Thanks for having us.
The dire situation in Artsakh and Armenia is developing at an ever increasing speed. And yesterday, as I said, in addition to the political crisis in Artsakh, Nikol Pashinyan held a press conference where he essentially put in the plainest terms possible that Armenia's security partnership with Russia and CSTO is not welcome for his regime. And despite the blockade of Artsakh and daily threats of violence by Aliyev, his government is interested in signing a treaty, both with Turks and Azerbaijanis, one that he calls a peace treaty, but in my opinion, one that can only be called capitulation. So, at times, Pashinyan and his team's behavior has been erratic, and one day he might criticize the Russians, the next day claim to be their best ally. But I think yesterday's speech leaves no room for doubt, does it, Arthur? What are your thoughts?
It's very difficult for me to comment on what this person said. It doesn't strike me as something rational. He is constantly saying different things about Russia, about Western powers. He goes back and forth. I don't think he has any expertise in this field, and he doesn't. He is a journalist. So I couldn't listen to him yesterday. It's just more than I can do. But I think there are some very, very dangerous trends here, and we're coming closer and closer to the edge of a precipice. And in the past, I always refrained from making strong statements about this group, but it's virtually impossible now to see that this group came with an agenda, and the agenda was to surrender Karabakh or Artsakh, and then to expel Russians from Armenia and to make Armenia a Turkish protectorate. I think now it's very difficult to not see that this was their program. As for Karabakh, as for the blockade, yesterday I was doing some research on Srebrenica late at night. This is exactly the Srebrenica scenario. Vlatko Mladic said that his strategy was to gradually strangle Srebrenica and force these people to leave. And I think that's exactly what Azeris are doing with Armenians in Karabakh. They're going to gradually strangle them, and then we will probably face ethnic cleansing, just like it happened in Srebrenica. And by the way, there's abundant evidence that English, French, and American governments were well aware of the fact that genocide was coming. They knew it at least 6 weeks prior to the attack, and they did nothing to stop it because they decided it was too hard to defend Srebrenica and it had to be surrendered.
And in fact, Azerbaijan, I forget which politician, I believe it might have been Ilham Aliyev himself, said, if Armenians want to leave and don't want to be citizens of Azerbaijan, they're welcome to. But if they're going to stay, then they need to sort of submit to Aliyev's rules. Uh, Among the other things that Pashinyan announced yesterday was the cancellation of the CSTO exercises in Armenia, and the reasoning for that was provided as essentially they could be perceived as a threat to Turkey and Azerbaijan. It could provoke them into doing something. Uh, William, what are your thoughts on what is transpiring? I know you've been pretty low profile recently compared to your active sort of activities in social media months ago. So welcome, I guess, on behalf of all of our viewers. And what are your thoughts about what's going on?
Thank you, Ovik. Um, my thoughts on Pashinyan haven't been exactly secret for a long time, and I will of course echo with what Arthur said, that they have a very plain anti-Russian program that they're implementing, and they have been implementing over the past several years. I think what has happened is that the Russians have effectively, implanted themselves into the process by virtue of their role in the region, uh, which I think is to be expected given uh, the role that they have traditionally and historically had in that region. So, you can try to wish them away as much as you want, but they're not going to disappear, and certainly not uh, at the request or at the wish of the Armenians or the Georgians, for that matter, or the Ukrainians, as we're seeing. And I'm sure at some point we'll get to. The CSTO has been a thorn in Pashinyan's side for quite some time. Of course, you'll remember the fact that he embarrassed not just the CSTO but also Putin by removing General Yuri Khachatурov, uh, from the head of the CSTO, which has a rotating leadership, and doing so without consulting the organization. And it seems like he will continue to spare no effort to make it as difficult as possible for the CSTO to actually fulfill its mission. He can complain as much as he wants about the inefficacy of the CSTO, but if he's unwilling to actually appeal to them, as he's shown over the past several years, then he can't accuse them of not actually doing what they're tasked with doing, which is fulfilling their duty to defend Armenia. And I would like to respond to the comment that he made, that you recounted, about it seeming, the CSTO exercises seeming threatening to Turkey and Azerbaijan. I think that's very much supposed to be the intention of such exercises, is to show that there is a threat that they have to worry about before entering Armenia. But they have shown time and again, when I say they, I mean Pashinyan and his cronies. I think it's always important to remember that he's not acting alone. They have shown that they are primarily concerned with appeasing Turkey and Azerbaijan, and doing everything in their power to make it very difficult for Russia to fulfill any of its obligations to Armenia.
And just to be clear, I think that he once again reiterated that Artsakh are now on their own in dealing with Azerbaijan. The level of engagement both within Armenia and diaspora in terms of reacting to all of these news, these shocking news, is a little bit worrying. As over the past 2 years, the Armenian nation has seen a continuum of tragic events, and during the 44-day war, both in both Armenia and diaspora, we witnessed, what national mobilization could look like from protests in front of the CNN office, thousands of people to wide-scale volunteering on the battlefield. This changed after November 10, I think, and in Armenia there was a very vocal resistance movement that was critical of Pashinyan and what they would term as a capitulation. But unfortunately, they were not able to remove Pashinyan, or basically demand his resignation, and the movement itself has died down. Um, but the regular people, the majority of the people, are on the sidelines. They were never able to get, I would say, hundreds of thousands of people on in the street, which someone would expect in such a dire situation. And in the diaspora, among politically invested circles, there have been great divisions as well, as can be exemplified by the split in the ARF. But a majority of diasporans as well don't seem to be expressing at least a vocal opinion on the matter. Maybe there is some passion. Maybe I'm not seeing it all the way from Armenia. But even the issue of this blockade or Pashinyan's speech yesterday, as just another example, is doesn't seem to be generating reactions. So, Will, you live in the diaspora and you've also thought about these issues over the past years. What is your take on this? Is this a real problem or an issue of perception on my side or others? What is it exactly? Is it apathy? Is it sublimated anger? Um, and if it is a problem, is it measurable? How can we determine what it was before and what it is today?
Yeah, I think it's a number of things. I think that's a good observation, Alvik, that uh, look, I think first and foremost we have to contextualize this question, right? And what you were saying about the number of people, who, for example, who were involved during the war and in days shortly thereafter, because in reality, their level of involvement and activity was probably the anomaly, right? And what we are seeing now is more in line with what we see normally, right? Where there are small groups of people who are heavily engaged, but the vast majority of the people, the masses, so to speak, will yeah, for the most part, be on the sidelines, and that applies to the diaspora as well as Armenia. I mean, even in 2018, anybody who was there, I mean, I was there uh, while the coup d'état was materializing, otherwise known as the revolution. And the fact of the matter is that most people were on the sidelines up until the very end, right? Just the very last days. So this idea that there are tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who are always at the ready to take action, I think is a bit misleading. Secondly, the ones in the diaspora who were very active before, for example, like the ANCA, are just as active now, probably more so, right? Given the criticality of the situation. But I think finally, and to really get to the heart of the matter, yes, I think there is apathy. I think there is exhaustion. And I think that a large part of that is certainly due to Pashinyan and his cronies, feeding disinformation into the pipeline. You said earlier, I think Arthur corroborated that, they are known for making contradictory statements, saying things that are meant to obfuscate and to confuse and to just mislead. So, people who follow that for a period of time are eventually just going to get tired, of trying to figure out what is the truth, essentially. And you see this actually as a strategy in other places, which is where they learned it from. But I also want to note, I do want to note that it's not all their fault, right? We can't blame we can't place the entire blame on them, and that's I think what you were alluding to, which is what I'd written about. I think we spent several decades, using protest as our primary vehicle of addressing political issues, and several decades on, particularly starting in 2020 and thereafter, we saw that that is perhaps not an effective tool to getting what we want. And I think many people are having a period of evaluation and assessment, and I think that that's important. It's just likewise important that we come to a conclusion as to what we're going to do next and act with vigor and resolve.
Okay. Arthur, do you have any thoughts on these same questions?
Yes, I'd like to be brief. I'll try to be brief. I agree with William. I think number one, what we heard yesterday was extremely disturbing and very dangerous. I think he's being more and more open about what he wants to do. And the fact that there's not a revolution and people have not taken to the streets is very alarming. These ramblings of an irrational person combined with a very clear agenda to surrender Armenia. It's not just Karabakh, to surrender us to Turkey. It was very clear. And the fact that, again, people are not in the streets like they were 4 years ago when they were protesting over the previous regime getting rich, that fact is alarming. I think what is needed is a systematic study of the public opinion by experts, because I think this group is using a very experienced PR group. They know the weaknesses of our population and they know how to manipulate it. What needs to happen is we need to have a group of experts who can systematically study these people, ask them questions, and understand why some of them, after all these series of catastrophes, are still supporting this group. We need to understand it. Some of their arguments are, yes, things are bad, but do you want the previous regime to come back and be rich again and have castles everywhere and be corrupt again? So this kind of argumentation, this level of argument, I think it's difficult for us to understand. We need some people who can understand it. There were some people in the villages saying, yes, the war may break out. Yes, it's a difficult time, but the previous regime didn't even put asphalt on the roads to our village. We didn't even have a road to our village. Now we have a road, and we don't have, the previous regime is not rich anymore. And yeah, we can be shot tomorrow by Azeri soldiers because they're 500 meters away from us. But is it better than Robert coming back and getting rich? I think this is going a little bit beyond the realm of what's rational, and we need some people who can understand it. We may need psychologists to just explain to us what happened to our population and how it's being manipulated and how we can undo it.
The traditional notion is that when there is unity among Armenians, both in diaspora and motherland, then we're successful. And assuming that this current regime is as temporary as possible, and after this current regime is gone, what will it entail to bring back this unity, and how critical do you think it is to achieve it in order to help both diaspora and Armenia remain strong, essentially like a symbiosis? Is there such a concept as basically a symbiosis between Armenia and the diaspora? Will?
I do think that there is a symbiosis. I think it's possible. And I think that unity is an important concept, but I also think that it's misunderstood. Usually, when people say unity, they mean, unity across the nation, right? As in everybody needs to be united. And I think that that is, first of all, a ridiculous proposition, right? That everybody is going to be united. First of all, it's impossible, and secondly, I personally have nothing in common with somebody who supports Nikol Pashinyan, and I have nothing to unite with them over. And what I do think is important is that the people who believe in a strong and independent Armenia, an Armenia that can fend for itself, and which will, protect the interests of the Armenian people and the Armenian nation across the world on the international stage, I think those people need to unite. And I think one of the problems that we've had over the past few years is that, and this is a problem that is not exclusive to us or to Armenians or to the Armenian opposition now, but it is one that you see often, is that petty differences and petty disagreements often overcome that goal of unity among people who otherwise share general principles, beliefs, and philosophies. And I think that unity among those people is of the utmost importance, and I hope that that is what we will achieve in the near future.
Right. Say what you will about the previous regime, but even the mere um, sort of act of holding those diaspora Armenian conferences, I thought at least set a good theme, and as opposed to compared to now. Arthur, do you have any comments on this as well in terms of what sort of elements could we unite over?
I absolutely agree. We don't need total unity. Number one, we need to remove this cancer growth. This is cancer. It needs to be removed. And we need a massive re-education program. We need to clean house in a major way. We need to unite all those people who still haven't lost their capacity for rational thinking, competence. We need a massive influx of expertise into Armenia, because Armenia is in dire straits, really, in terms of competence and having an expert community, people who can actually run this country. So no, it's not about unity. It's about a massive revolution, another revolution, educational revolution, professional revolution. This is what we need here, and this cancer growth needs to go. And people who are supporting these people, they should be held responsible for what they did to us.
Since we have Will on, I do want to talk about his previous work in documenting essentially the work of foreign-funded NGOs in Armenia. And you have a great report on the Armenite about this, William. And in fact, I was reminded of the problem uh, just yesterday when in a Facebook group that I'm a member of, someone asked for recommendations of news sources in Armenia. Uh, one of them immediately recommended Azat Utun, which we all know is funded by U.S. State Department. While not a member, I don't remember which news source, but it quickly generated allegations that it's funded by Russia or the cronies of one or this or that oligarch. Um, so I also perform regular monitoring of media in YouTube. So the topic is near and dear to me. But uh, can you tell us and the listener and the viewer how you came about to this problem and how big is the problem of foreign influence in Armenian media, and is that how is it related to what we're seeing in Armenian politics today?
Let me start by asking a question, and you can take it rhetorically if you want. But if you were a person who wanted to see an independent country, or you believed in an independent country, what would you think about thousands of locals and foreigners funded by foreign governments and foreign organizations uh, advancing for the agendas of those foreign governments and foreign organizations in that country? I mean,
I would be shocked. I would be disgusted. But the fact of the matter is that most consumers of media aren't um, well educated enough to.
right, and uh, the fact is that even being educated about it makes doesn't make it that much easier to not be influenced by the biases that these agencies might have in delivering whatever information they are tasked with delivering. So as far as responding to your question about what was the impetus essentially for me doing the research that I did and writing the article that I did, uh, it was that I believe that Armenia should be an independent country so far as it's possible, and that these influences, which I documented pretty extensively, and I would say that it's not even complete. Uh, even with the hundreds of connections and the documents and the various funding that I was able to uncover, it's certainly not the entire picture. There's a lot more to it. And what's really troubling about that is that these are, in many cases, the primary sources of information in the country, right? And yes, something like the BBC in the United States, and nobody would really bat an eyelash at seeing something like that. But the fact of the matter is that in the United States, in the largest media market in the world, okay, the BBC is but a small player, whereas in Armenia, many of these organizations are the largest players, okay? When we're talking about Azat Utun, when we're talking about CivilNet, when we're talking about Factor TV, okay, when we're talking about head, all these other I mean, there are media initiative center in you name it. You're talking about informational organizations, okay, that received lots of money from foreign governments, okay, and in some of the cases, in you have very well documented cases of them pushing certain agendas. I've written about this again, um, about CivilNet, participating in track two diplomacy stuff, in trying to, you know, reestablish relations between Turkey and Armenia. Their people went, I think it was to Georgia, and it was on a number of occasions. I mean, these are things that were being promoted by the European Union and other and organizations and other governments, that uh, were not necessarily in the interest of Armenia, right? They were not in the interest of Armenia, because while Armenians and Armenian society, which was still in its essentially embryonic stages, right, as an independent state, was growing, was developing, was sort of maturing, right? It was being bombarded with all this foreign money, okay, being directed to media organizations, and not only media organizations, to be sure, okay, but also these what were called civil society organizations, pushing all sorts of things that had very little to do with the cares and troubles of Armenian society over the past 30 years, and distracting the society from what was really at stake, right? And what was really going on, particularly in the neighboring countries that were evidently preparing for war, which we saw come to its fruition in 2020, when Azerbaijan, not by itself, but in conjunction with Turkey, okay, the same country that, uh, uh, you know, like I said, some of these organizations were having track two diplomacy meetings with, was assisting Azerbaijan in ethnically cleansing Artsakh, and then occupying parts of Armenia. So you tell me, what the impact of these organizations were.
Right. I mean, it's I mean, sometimes it's pretty visible to the even to the naked eye in terms of some of the basic things. For instance, I remember there was a lot of funding, and this funding comes with strings attached, right? So let's say the Norwegian embassy may request some coverage of abuses in the army or sort of women's rights, and not to sort of deprecate or downplay those issues, but when there is an inordinate focus on those issues and not enough on sort of the real needs which Armenia had, which is security, I think that's a problem. Um, One criticism of your work, William, that I've heard frequently is that you focus a lot on Western media, but not Russian media or, for instance, Sputnik and others. Is there a reason for that, or is that an accurate perception? And if so, what's the reason for that?
Well, the reason for that, or to explain the reason for that, I could refer to your own research. If you link to the research that you've done on the most popular YouTube channels, right? What is the most popular YouTube channel, right?
Right,
Uh, is it Sputnik? Is it Russia Today? Is it RIA Novosti? No, it's none of those. It's Azat, right?
right.
And uh, uh, they're
Yeah,
they
they're not
have
even
their
in the
own.
top 20, I believe. But yes, yeah, let's establish that Russian media, at least on YouTube, at the maybe on TV it's different, but at least on YouTube, they don't occupy any sort of dominant position in terms of
Mm,
market share. But how about in terms of the type of content? For instance, does foreign funding of Russian media work the same way, where the Russian embassy may come and say, do more coverage of, I don't know, pro-Russian schools and so forth, Russian language schools. How does, or, where do those differences lie between how these, how Russian media works and how foreign funded Western media works?
mhm. The fact of the matter is that yes, the Russians also have their own public diplomacy programs, as they're called, or soft power in more colloquial terms, um, of ensuring the right coverage, so to speak, of whatever it is they are pursuing. Um, I think that, and it doesn't work the same way, right? Because usually what happens in the American or the Western context is that you have established programs under the guise of which you have funding that is then distributed. There's many layers to the hierarchy, and there are dozens of organizations, if not hundreds, that might eventually be the ones handing the money to whatever recipient or benefactor organization there is. It doesn't work that way, so far as I've been able to see in the Russian efforts. Usually, what will probably happen is you will have either yes, meetings with government officials who will request certain things in exchange for whatever it is they might be offering that day, or having the um, process uh, sort of initiated and completed through proxies. The long and short of it is the Russian approach to it is, for lack of a better way of putting it, much more crude than what you see in the West. The Western approach is very refined. I mean, they were the ones who effectively developed this, right? And not only did they develop it, they refined it over decades. And it's been very successful. Also, keep in mind, Armenia is not the first or the last case, right? So this is something that's been tried and tested in many other countries, from Eastern Europe to the Middle East to Ukraine. Of course, I wrote about this situation in Ukraine many times, and it's not a coincidence that the places where this money is present, okay, seem to have a very similar experience with what are called revolutions.
Arthur, the U.S. has FARA, which requires a for only like a subset of the foreign funded media to register as foreign agents. I don't know how how they pick those media, but for instance, Sputnik and Russia Today are among those. Um, what do you think about addressing this? As is this a legislative problem that can be legislated away, or what is the core problem that needs to be solved? And of course, your thoughts about what William also has said so far.
I think something needs to be done, something decisive, something radical. Once this cancer growth is removed, I think measures should be taken so that we are no longer being managed and influenced by some forces operating outside of Armenia that are against our interests. But that's more of a William question. I think he would be better suited to answer it. But what I do want to say is that there's a very, very specific and very clear argument that they pushed for here, and it worked. You are not very rich, you're suffering from corruption. You see how your rulers are building castles and buying islands and all those fairy tales that we heard, or exaggerations perhaps. So if you want to get rid of corruption, and if you want to live like Georgia, look at Georgia. They're doing well because they rejected Russia. What you need to do is, if you want to live well, is get rid of the Russians. To get rid of the Russians, you need to get rid of Karabakh. And then once you get rid of Karabakh and the Russians, you will be rich, and you will have prosperity, and you will have Turkish goods coming in, and you will live like the Georgians live. Look at Georgia. That's the argument they pushed for, and it worked. And I can't tell you how many people now honestly believe it. The root of all our problems is Russia and the previous regime. It worked. They know how to manipulate our population, playing the darkest sides of our society: greed, envy, this ability to believe, listen to fairy tales and believe in fairy tales like $8 billion that the second president took out of Armenia, of which we have not a single receipt, not a single witness, not a single document. This is partly our fault, of our people. But anyway, this is exactly what they did, and it worked. And this is why we have what we have.
Yeah, also same question to you. Anything you want to add to what Arthur said, and also how do you fix this problem once there is a national government in place?
Hmm. Yeah, you know, FARA is commonly cited. I believe I even included that in my article I did, and you know, it's not the only one either. There are other countries that have registration requirements. The fact of the matter is, in Armenia's situation, okay, registration is not going far enough, right? Because a lot of this information, frankly, was publicly available, right? Uh, you could, if you were interested, find out, you know, where a lot of these people were getting their money, not least because, you know, in many cases they were required to disclose that. Now, as to what, you know, what amounts we're talking about, that was a little less clear, but, you know, by and large, you could find out that, you know, for example, a certain media outlet is getting money. It's no secret that Azat is funded by the United States Congress. What I think in Armenia's case was necessary and might be necessary again in the future is a sort of limitation, right? In recognition of the fact that Armenia is a small country, it's a developing country, it's a country that requires a period of time for it to develop a society that is geared and oriented toward the betterment of Armenia as a national state, you know, as a nation state, as it were. And obviously, what we see, you know, through the funding that's provided, uh, you know, primarily from the European Union and people who are sort of philosophically aligned, like the Open Society Foundations, with the ideas of the European Union of, you know, no borders and multiculturalism and sort of this idea that nations are passe. uh, you know, I don't think that that has a place in a country that is surrounded by, you know, genocidal neighbors that have made no secret of their plans to eliminate Armenians from that land. I don't know why this needs to be constantly rehashed as though this is some, you know, a secret or, uh, uh, you know, something that's hidden that that you know we seem to rediscover every few years. I mean, they have, you know, the leaders of the country say this on a regular basis, right? How many times do they have to say it? How many times do they actually have to make the move toward another genocide for us to understand, for people to understand that, wait a second, uh, maybe something is awry, maybe we need to address it. Um, Vartan Pedrosyan actually has a great skit about this. I don't know if you've seen it, but I would highly recommend. I think it's on Halveda, something about.
Well, not only did they not make a secret of it, they just did it 2 years ago in front of our eyes.
Exactly. Yep.
They attacked us. They
Yep.
tortured and killed our prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
They cleansed the population of Hadrut.
Mm-hmm.
They just did it 2 years ago, and it still needs to be reiterated. There's something wrong with this situation.
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, you know, Arthur talked about this earlier, but I mean, the blockade that is taking place right now. I mean, what do you expect when you have a land filled with people that have access to the outside world through only a single road, and that road is blocked in the dead of winter? I mean, what exactly? I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out, okay? Yet we continue to have to explain this not to the international community, but to people within Armenian society. Now,
Right.
why is that? And why is it that there are people who are, I mean, including Pashinyan himself, attacking the Russian peacekeepers when the Armenian military, which is which was right, uh, previously responsible for the security of the Armenians in Artsakh, our brethren, why do we need to explain to them that what's happening in Artsakh is a problem? And it's not the Russians who are causing the problem, but the fact that the leader of the Armenian state, whether we like it or not, is unwilling to do anything.
Right.
William, what we need is we need to understand that this is run as a religious sect. The methods that they use to run their organization, it's like a religious sect. We need specialists, because you and I cannot understand this. We need specialists who know how sect leaders manage to kind of subjugate and submit their, make their members, sect members, submit to them absolutely and unconditionally. They are diffusing these messages that come from this sick man, and they're repeating these messages to each other, and it's like they know them by heart. There's a very powerful PR mechanism working there, and it is being run like a sect. Look, a few days ago he said, yes, I made mistakes, but I made them with love. This is a religious sect. I mean, this is not a statesperson speaking. You can't speak like this.
Or there, just to respond to that very, very briefly, there was another piece that I'd written about essentially the Pavlovian response that's developed among Armenian, segments of Armenian society.
100%.
Right? As soon as you say certain words,
corruption,
like corruption, for example, you say corruption, all of a sudden, people's, ears perk up, and you say Robert Khachikyan, and there's images of somebody with fangs, probably with like blood dripping from them, immediately evoked in people's minds. It's kind of it is scary when you talk to people and they have this response. And what's interesting is that it's almost the same response across the spectrum, right? Which indicates that there is something that some sort of program, right, that was implemented to ensure that people have certain response, a certain visceral response to certain sort of keywords or.
That's exactly
catalysts.
right. Yeah. That's exactly right. The moment you say something, would you like the previous regime to come back? Right. Would you like Robert to come back? Do you want him to build more castles?
Like
it's like a dog. You show them the bone and they start salivating. It's exactly right.
Let's not single out Robert. Serge has a pretty good sort of response too. But
better for worse.
I think sometimes it can be. I hope it's not construed as we're sort of legitimizing anything that has happened in the past. But in reality, corruption. We talked about it. I don't want to go into it, but there is a corruption perception index. People should look it up. Corruption, the perception of corruption is much higher than the actual corruption, where when they measured it, Armenia's corruption was close to what maybe somewhere in Eastern Europe you would get, but the perception of corruption was Kazakhstan level corruption, and that is unhealthy, and that is what we're talking about when we're saying foreign funded media and all these messages being amplified way more than they need to be and way more than they're occurring naturally, which is still regrettable, and corruption should be minimized in any case. But when you say the formers, I remember security. I remember Artsakh. I remember being able to hike through the hills of Hadrut. So
and there's an interesting paradox there. Or maybe an irony is a better way of describing it, that many of the people who were promoting this idea of rampant and ubiquitous corruption in Armenia's government were actually some of the greatest financial beneficiaries of this money and in terms of Armenian society. I mean, these people were essentially became upper class, right? Because economically, right? Because they were receiving so much money from foreign governments, okay, to promote these agendas, that they effectively outpaced, the average person in Armenia who was making an honest living. And while they were living the high life and going to the restaurants and bars that were being developed during Robert Khachikyan's and Serge Sarkisyan's time due to the astute policies that these presidents implemented, they were complaining about everything, claiming that there was corruption, and then taking vacations in Europe, the United States, and Asia.
Switching gears yet again, I wanted to sort of do a little mental exercise about what's going on in the world, specifically with Ukraine, the horrible war there, and many are now predicting, I think, such as yourself as well, Arthur, have predicted a great schism, even more than what currently exists between Russia and the Western world. Um, and the result of that, many are sort of predicting to be a multipolar world with regional actors playing a bigger role, but at the same time, not too much cooperation between these poles, I guess. So I wanted to ask you, Arthur, first, what are like how real are the predictions of a multipolar world, and how much of this is dependent on the outcome of what happens in Ukraine?
I don't think what we're looking at is a multipolar world right now. What we're looking at is a real threat of a nuclear war, a real threat. We just made another step towards nuclear war. Yesterday, the West announced its intention to go all the way, sadly driven by the same people who destroyed the post-Cold War order in the 90s, deciding that they have to dictate to Russia and ignore Russia and put it in the corner. So they decided that now they're going to deliver Western-made heavy tanks to the Ukrainian forces, which is going to tip the balance in favor of Ukraine. Russia has already announced that it's going to respond. It's going to mobilize its economy and basically run it like it's a war, like in war conditions, totally mobilize its economy. And yesterday, Russian experts were discussing the possibility of conducting nuclear tests and putting nuclear warheads on some of the missiles. The West has a certain advantage in terms of conventional technology and conventional weaponry, and the only card Russia has is tactical nuclear weapons and possibly even strategic nuclear weapons. So the West is not showing no intention of stopping, and Russia cannot stop either because it cannot lose this war. Otherwise, Russia will disintegrate. The stakes are very high, and there's a high risk now that in response to these new deliveries of tanks and possibly even airplanes, Russia will raise the question of using tactical nuclear weapons to defend itself, because now that the war is approaching Russia's borders. So we may face even a limited nuclear exchange, possibly, as sad as it is, something comparable to Chernobyl. And if that, the problem with this kind of situation is that people cannot stop these things once they start. There's a certain mechanism of escalation with strike, counter-strike, counter-strike that people cannot stop even if they want to. And we've seen dozens of examples of that during the Cold War, during World War I. So this mechanism, once it starts functioning, cannot be stopped. And we're coming very close to it with this latest escalation. And I think there may be a point where it would make sense to prepare for some kind of civil defense in case this happens.
Wow, that's a pretty sort of dire outlook, and I want to sort of quote a friend of mine from the West who said, what could we have done? What would have been a more rational U.S. policy, in your opinion? Taking into account that there are maybe some, a lot of Ukrainians watching us. I also have family on both sides of the conflict, essentially, and they're not talking to each other. But how do you achieve an equitable solution without going to nuclear war in this case?
I know exactly what the US should have done. And it's not even me talking, nobody knows me. James Baker knew exactly what needed to be done. Ronald Reagan knew what needed to be done. George Kennan knew. Robert Cohen knew. William Burns, the American ambassador in Moscow, knew. Jack Matlock knew. John Mersheimer. All these people knew exactly what needed to be done. Russia had to be included in a European structure, not a security architecture, not excluded from it. And certain immigrant communities in the United States and the military-industrial complex should not have been allowed to influence foreign policy decision-making that brought us to this cosmic catastrophe. We know exactly what should have been done. The proposals of Medvedev in 2008 to create, not to expand NATO, but instead to create an all-inclusive European security architecture that would not neglect Russia's interests. Russia should not be treated like a loser. Russia's interests should not be neglected. All this fanatical Russophobia that was spread in Europe by some of our Eastern European friends should not have taken place. There are a lot of things that should have been done, but sadly, people would not listen. We're being governed by fanatics. We're not being governed by people like Kissinger or John Kennedy or James Baker or Ronald Reagan. We're being governed by fanatics. This is liberal Bolshevism, as a result of which we've seen this catastrophe. And the Ukrainian people and the Russian people and others have become hostages in this political game. And I'm not happy about this at all.
I could, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
None of us are. But we'll maybe also asking you, assuming that we're not all incinerated in a nuclear catastrophe in the next 10 years, what do you predict the future may look like in this region? How different will it be from today?
Yeah, I think there's excuse me. I think there's significant excuse me.
I like your mug.
Oh, thank you.
Show us the mug. Show us the mug. Comments are disabled.
Comments have been disabled. Yeah.
Not in this video unless you misbehave, but
yeah, no, please. That was a gift. It's not an indication of how I, think about comments, as evinced, I think, by my response to so many of them. As far as the region is concerned, I mean, Arthur made no bones about the direction in which it's headed. I hope that it's not so bleak, but it's hard to see a silver lining here. There's obviously a massive realignment taking place in the global world order. We can't look at. I always encourage my fellow Armenians to not suffer from the myopia that we so often do, and look solely at our region, or even just ourselves. It's not just Russia, of course. It's not just Europe. We also see that we know that China will be a superpower if it is not already, and it is, of course. But something more on par with the United States. It will surpass the American economy in the forthcoming decade, less than a decade. I think by 2030, it's projected to surpass the United States. So we have to, understand that whatever is happening with Russia is happening in that context as well. There's obviously concern in the West that Russia would be more likely to align with China. Of course, as Arthur said, a lot of these Americans, American foreign policy establishment experts understood this, and they could have struck while the iron was hot in the early 90s, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they not only did they miss that opportunity, they seem to have scuttled it purposely for some reason. And I don't think that there is any doubt about who was responsible for that. The neocons obviously had some interest in perpetuating this state of conflict for the United States for, essentially indefinitely. And that is what we're seeing. Let's also not forget that objective has led to a rearming of Turkey, right? Turkey, of course, it was very prudent in the steps that it made, or the steps that it took to reestablish itself as a regional superpower. But it wasn't done in a vacuum. I mean, this was an area that NATO, and when I say NATO, I mean the United States, heavily invested in to ensure that Turkey was a bulwark against Russia, and that has paid dividends, of course, for NATO and the Europeans and the Americans, but it has also pushed the West into sort of a corner, because Turkey, it's not in Turkey's interest to for Russia and the West to have a good relationship, right? It would be more beneficial for Turkey if Turkey and the West had a good relationship, and that's essentially how we see it having played out. I think it was. I don't think it was Mersheimer, although Mersheimer, of course, warned us about this, as many of these uh, people did. But just the idea that the Russians would have ever been okay with the Ukrainians or with Ukraine being essentially a proxy of the West is so utterly preposterous. Okay, irrespective of what you think of Ukraine and Ukrainians and their relationship with Russia and Russians and how Russian they are, how Ukrainian they are, the fact of the matter is that for Russia, it's a security risk to have a country that is largely a plain, okay, leading straight into the heart of Russia, okay, and it would have been impossible for them to allow, okay, American, European, essentially NATO military hardware, personnel bases potentially on its doorstep. It just
400 miles from Moscow. Sorry to jump in. 400 miles from Moscow.
which is the distance, between effectively the distance between San Francisco and Los Angeles. I mean,
Oh yeah.
think about like the Chinese, having military personnel in San Francisco. It's like not something that would be conscionable in any other context. But of course, when it concerns Russia, anything goes. So as to what Armenia is going to do in this situation, I think not much. I think Armenia has to deal with the consequences as they come, and it's impossible to predict exactly what's going to happen. Hopefully, we are in a position to somehow capitalize on the chaos that is developing. But with the current leadership in the country, that's not going to happen. Maybe we have an opportunity to do so sometime in the future. I mean, who knows where any of these things are going to go? I mean, also keep in mind that our enemies, Turkey and Azerbaijan in particular, are much better positioned to take advantage of a chaotic, anarchic situation in our region. So particularly with this current leadership. So if anything were to happen where the Russians were incapacitated to the point where they're unable to actually do anything, it's a perfect opportunity for the Turks to, do what it is they've been intending to do for a very long time, which is step in and take over Armenia proper.
And I want to just point out, yes, one thing that we have to realize that we have never had united Turkey on two sides of Armenia, on both sides, east and west. This is the first time in history that we have united Turkey, engulfing us from all these directions. And if they cut through Zangezur, which is going to take them 48 hours if they wanted to do it, even less, then we'll be totally surrounded. And they may, put a military base in Georgia, which they intended to do for a long time. And then we'll be another Karabakh. We'll be completely encircled, and we'll have beautiful speeches coming from Macron and Washington saying that they condemn the actions of Turkey, and they call on both parties to show restraint, which is what they do. By the way, Macron promised that they will never let Armenians down, and here we are, 120,000 people surrounded, not a single step being taken other than phone calls and declarations. Nothing is being done. And I was in the United States for 10 days, not a single report, not a single one on BBC or CNN. There are 120,000 people in this humanitarian catastrophe, in the blockade, not a single report. I haven't seen a single thing. That's number one. Number two, yes, Will, you're right. There may be a point where Russia will not be able to help, even if it wanted to help. And it's heavily dependent now on Turkey. And Turkey did use this opportunity, as I predicted, to go in all the way once this war started. And I even heard from private sources that some of the soldiers who were peacekeepers in Karabakh were now mobilized to go to Ukraine. And some of them were killed there. So yes, you're absolutely right.
For many years, Armenia's foreign policy architects had taken pride in this idea of complementarism when dealing with superpowers. Is that still sort of a valid strategy for Armenia? And how much maneuver room is there for us to be complementary to two warring sides?
I think it was difficult then. It's going to be even more difficult now. It was a very fine line, and actually the one of the big sort of bargaining chips that we had, which allowed us to talk with both sides and to have a relatively strong relationship with uh, all the parties, was Artsakh. And the fact that the Artsakh issue was not resolved at this point, it seems as though Azerbaijan holds all the cards on that front, and we have lost, the ability to um, negotiate with the West. I think we've lost the ability to negotiate with Russia. We've certainly lost any ability to negotiate with Turkey, and they've made no secret of that. I mean, it's kind of interesting if anybody remembers the protocols in during Serge Sarkisyan's administration. I mean, there were actual negotiations taking place. Now, whether or not you agreed or disagreed with it, I disagreed with it at the time, and I think that it was not done in the right way. But the fact of the matter is that the Turks were sitting around the table and actually having a negotiation with the Armenian government. That is no longer taking place. Erdogan has made no secret of that. I mean, he said it right. He has certain demands that will be met, and if they are not met, then Armenia will not get what it wants. And I mean that. To say nothing of the Azeris who were essentially, cowering with their tail between their legs during Serge Sarkisyan's administration, are now, standing up on any world stage that they can possibly get on, and proclaiming, okay, that Artsakh will be a part of Azerbaijan. The Armenians there will be Azeri citizens, and Armenia can do nothing about it. And the reason that they can say that and do that is because Armenia is not doing anything about it.
If I may jump in quickly, I totally
Yes.
agree. We totally lost our ability to negotiate with these parties. We're being dictated to. We're being openly threatened and given ultimatums. We totally lost our status and our ability to negotiate. Balancing between great powers is a great thing. Turkey is very good at it. It's playing a double game because it has a huge potential, economic, military, strategic, technological, and it can do it. Number one, we ruined our country for most of these 30 years. We didn't manage to build an economy, technology, science, or industry. 30 years of my screaming obviously didn't do anything. Well, who am I? Really, nobody knows me. But you can do it. You can balance between the great powers when both parties or some parties have interest in you. Our problem is that the West has no interest in us. We can't balance between the West and Russia. Russia has some interest in us, and it has some interest in Azerbaijan and Turkey. So at least there we have, let's say, 40% of their attention. The West, other than beautiful words and speeches written in French and English, just like in 1915, these declarations, other than declarations, the West has no interest in us. And this shameful visit by Ms. Borderline, or whatever her last name was, to Baku when she declared that Azerbaijan is their reliable partner and didn't even bother to stop in Yerevan, our brilliant beacon of democracy, velvet democracy here, got totally shunned. And she went to Baku and said that you are our reliable partners as you're making out with Aliyev. That was very shameful. So you can balance between the great powers when there's interest in you from several sides. We don't have that. Nobody's really interested in us. Russia is still a little bit interested, but she may lose interest in us also, especially given the kind of government we elected for the second time.
Does it then follow that if we cannot balance, then we need to, I guess, sort of predict, who will be the hegemon in this region in the future? Then does the argument then that some Armenians make, does that make sense? That, hey, Russia is a goner from the region, and therefore we should sort of we should place our bets and cut our losses as much as we can. Doesn't that then sort of legitimize Nikol Pashinyan's argument that, hey, Artsakh is gone, but at least we can preserve the 29,800 square kilometers?
This is so ridiculous. I don't know where to start. Number one,
sorry.
I know you're just kind of conveying the message. I don't believe in praying. I believe in acting and thinking. Russia is not gone yet. And yes, if Russia is gone, we will be swallowed up by Turkey and Azerbaijan, by united Turkey from both sides, just like back in 1915. And the idea that you can surrender to them and save your lives, I would encourage our listeners to read some documents from 1915. there were cases when Turks promised, to spare the lives of those Armenians who surrendered to them. They were killed in the most brutal and horrific manner, including being burned in churches. If you guys want to read some details, please, there are many books about the subject. So the idea that capitulation and surrender is a way to peace, it's a ridiculous idea based on both the Armenian experience and the world experience. This does not happen, and Russia is not a goner yet.
I do believe in praying, and I think we should pray more, but I don't think that that is the end of it. I think that we have to understand the just the reality of our circumstance. I think ignoring our circumstances as though they don't exist has not served us well in the past, and I don't think it's going to serve us well in the future. I think it is important for us to realize, okay, that if we want to survive, if we have not just an interest in survival, but also maintaining a state that is of Armenians, by Armenians, with Armenians, okay, then we have to take certain steps to ensure that that is not just realized but also preserved. Now, we have what we have now, but are we going to have that 15, 20 years from now, okay, when we have open borders with Turkey and Azerbaijan, and you have 90 million Turks, with open access to any part of Armenia? I mean, I have a hard time understanding how people rationalize this. I mean, I think this is what this goes to what Arthur was saying about sort of like the irrational, unreasonable conversation that's taking place, right? Maybe there are some Armenians that remain, as sort of tokens of an Armenian existence in these places. But I think there again, when we take into account what our interests are and what history has shown, I'm not, a lot of people think that by saying that we have to align with Russia, Armenia has to align with Russia, I'm some sort of a radical Russophile. That is not the case whatsoever. Okay, I am just trying to be realistic about the situation. Okay, the West will never look at Armenia in the same way that it looks at Turkey with googly eyes, okay, because Turkey is a massive country, not least because it stole all those lands and those treasures and reestablished a very powerful army, which was then funded by NATO and is currently funded by NATO, okay, and reinforced by NATO. What on earth, speaking to Arthur's point, what on earth is Armenia offering, right? What is Armenia putting on the table and saying, if we align with you, this is what you're going to get, or you align with us, this is what we're going to get. Like, there's really not much there. Whereas in the Russian case, again, to Arthur's point, there might be something. There might not be anything. Yeah. Maybe, there have been people, I think both of you are probably aware, who have suggested that at this point, we have very little to offer Russia. Okay, and we've shown, in several instances that we just are, we're not a dependable ally. We're unwilling to actually deliver when we're expected to deliver as allies, supposed allies of Russia and Russians. So what exactly are we bringing to the table? And actually, I mean, she was criticized for it when she said it, but Margarita
Simonian.
Simonian, sorry, I don't know why I said Baldassarian, but Simon, yeah, she said it, years ago, that Russians have done this, and this. I mean, she essentially enumerated all the things that the Russians have done for Armenia. What essentially has Armenia done in response, besides disparage Russia and Russians, allow anti-Russian protests, allow the Russian embassy in Yerevan to be egged, with Ararat Mirzoyan, who is now part of, Nikol Pashinyan's government, has been part of his inner circle for a long time, who was, present at that. I mean, what exactly are the Armenians offering? So it's unclear whether or not the Russians are going to be interested in taking up the mantle for Armenia when we're unwilling to commit.
Well, you may be interested to know, Hovik, you too. One of the arguments that's being discussed consistently is the following. The West promised to help us massively. As soon as we leave the CSTO and as soon as we break up with Russia, they will provide massive assistance. It's being said over and over again.
Essentially, we need to prove our devotion.
Yes. We need to bring more red roses to Nancy Pelosi when she comes to the airport. So when I ask who said it, where, when, and where is it written, there's no answer for it. Oh, it's just, it's a discourse. So, but the thing is, this ridiculous proposition, there are a lot of people who believe in it. This is what we have come to. And it's actively being discussed. Once we leave Russia, France promised us drones 2 years ago, but we didn't accept them. The US said, make up your mind. If you leave Russia, we will help you. It's this kind of cartoonish kind of discussion. It's these cartoonish discussions at the lowest possible level. And people are believing these ideas.
I appreciate this discussion a lot. But before also we go, William, when I read your introduction, I forgot to mention one thing, which is children's book author. Can you can you describe your latest endeavor, which is, I believe, a children's book about Rafi, and just in a few sentences? And
thank you.
Yeah.
Rafi Hovhannisyan?
No, Rafi the writer.
Rafi Hovhannisyan?
Yeah.
Hakob
Melik Hakopian.
Yes.
The prophet of Payajuk. Thank you, Hovik. I appreciate that. The book is a project that my wife and I initiated. It's under a press that we established called Proverbs 1-2 Press, which is named, of course, after the first sentence that was translated into Armenian by Mesrop Marshtos after he created the Armenian alphabet. And it's a series that we are developing called Great Armenians for Kids. We realized after many years working in the Armenian world, I've worked a long time in the diaspora, but we also lived and worked in Armenia for a long time before returning so she could do her PhD in Armenian studies. We realized that a lot of the things that we discuss and a lot of the, frankly, problems that I think we have in our reality are due to the fact that we don't read many of the great authors and the literature and the texts and the documents that came before us that provide us insight and provide us guidance for how we should look at our current problems and how we should address them so that we can have a brighter future. So the idea was to introduce the youth to our greats from an early age, and that is what we have started doing. The first book was Rafi. The second book, I'm not going to tell you who it's about.
Oh, man, okay.
I guess.
Well, good luck to you. I think it's a great endeavor. Being in Armenia, my copy is taking a bit longer to arrive, but I believe it's in the mail.
It's on its way.
I'm looking forward to it. My son is looking forward to it. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. And this was another collaboration between 168 Hours and the Groong podcast to bring more English language coverage on the crisis in Artsakh. Our hearts, our minds are with Artsakh today, and I think we cannot trivialize the horror they're going through right now. But if any Artsakhis are listening, we're with you, and you have our support all the way.
Thank you for the invitation, Hovik, and thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Will.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
That concludes this week's conversation on Groong. We look forward to your feedback, including your suggestions for conversation topics in the future. Contact us on our website at groong.org. That's GROONG. Or on our Facebook page, ANN-Groong, or in our Facebook group, Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Lara Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. I'm Helvik Manacharyan, and on behalf of everyone in this episode, I wish you a good week. Thank you for listening, and talk to you soon.